Welcome to a series of interviews with ALA presidential candidates for the 2016-17 term. I'm library technology consultant Carson Block. In our conversation, we explore both tech and non-tech library leadership topics. Our guest today is Joseph Janes. Janes is associate professor and chair of the MLIS program at the University of Washington Information School, a frequent speaker in the U.S. and abroad. He is the co-author of several books on librarianship, technology, and their relationship, including Library 2020. Janes has written a monthly column for American Libraries magazine since 2002 and is also a candidate for president of the American Library Association for 2016-17. He's the creator and host of Documents That Changed the World, a popular podcast series on the cultural impacts of historic documents. He holds the MLS and PhD from Syracuse University and has taught at the University of Michigan, the University of Toronto, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the State University of New York at Albany, as well as at Syracuse and Washington. Joseph, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Please give me your elevator speech. What makes libraries important in 2015?
What makes libraries important in 2015 is what has made libraries important since the dawn of time. We make everything better. We make individual people's lives better. We make communities better. We make organizations better. We make information better. We make technology better. We make everything better. We're critical infrastructure in all the places and communities and clienteles and situations and environments we work in. And better libraries make things even better. So we all want good, strong, happy libraries and librarians to make the world a better place.
It sounds like libraries might be the ultimate value add.
I wouldn't disagree with that in the slightest.
How have your beliefs about libraries influenced your current work or your past work?
That's a really interesting question. I'm a little bit curious what you mean by that.
Well, I think that our beliefs, my belief is that our core beliefs guide us in the big and little decisions in our lives.
I agree with that as well. I started out in a really small town. The village I grew up in was less than 1,000 people, and the big city next door was about 10,000. And I kind of grew up in that library, first as a young kid just using it, and then when my mom started to work there, I started to work there too. And I think that kind of starting point with a small, moderate-sized public library, very closely tied to the people in that community. People were, passionate readers and supporters of the library and so on. I think that gives you a sensitivity, a sensibility about libraries that probably manifests differently in other ways. And then when I went to college, went to Syracuse, as an undergraduate, all of a sudden you have multiple libraries all over campus, and they're these huge, academic collections with, government documents. Who even knew government documents existed until I roamed around the steps one day as an undergrad, but actually did that. And holy crap, look at all this, stuff from governments I never even heard of. And you put the two of those together and you get this real sense of intimacy and coziness and small town feel. And then these grandiose spaces, there's an old Carnegie Library at Syracuse, these grandiose spaces, the high vaulted ceilings and the knowledge of the human species and all the rest of it. And that's what we have. We're all of those things and a whole lot more besides. And I think that kind of, background and perception of what libraries are and how they work and so on has carried with me since those very early days.
One of my beliefs is that great libraries are hyper-local, and that is they understand the needs of their communities and create services and collections to meet those needs. Being hyper-local, though, makes it a little hard sometimes for all libraries to work together at scale. For instance, tackling issues such as bandwidth, ebooks, and the performance of ILS systems. What's your take on that?
I think that's right. Normal people, associate with their library, and that's the one they largely have experience with. So your community library, your corporate library, your school library, your thing. And then there's also this notion of libraries sort of broadly understood. And so, individual libraries serve individual communities and clientele, and that's the way it ought to be. And the library enterprise, let's leave it at North America for the moment, the library enterprise is enormous. The number of institutions, the number of people, the budget, the market muscle that we have. And we use that sometimes well. If you look at, co-ops and systems and buying groups and consortia and so on in terms of negotiating for, ebook licenses and public journal databases and so on, we're pretty good at that. Interlibrary loan is really important, and we've been at that for a long time. Look at organizations, OCLC, for example, which is a highly cooperative institution. ALA, of course. I would love if those, if we had more examples of that, and if they were, if they were able to be more productive. And like with so many things, it's a balancing act. You can't give away the keys to the store and let somebody else run your library. Because they don't know your community and they don't face your challenges and so on and your opportunities. But by the same token, we can't all be on our own. And the kind of, need to have something that brings us together, that unifies us, that allows us to work together on really important issues like the ones you mentioned and so many others, and the need to be individually responsive. Again, that's been the library thing for a long time. I think, I'd like to think that there are more opportunities to work together and to be more coherent, but you can't be too far on either side of that spectrum or you wind up losing something really important.
It's definitely a big thing, I think, that a lot of us work to tackle. And I was hoping you had a magic bullet.
Well, if I did, I would have been president 20 years ago. Sadly not.
Well, fair enough. What is the most powerful role for technology in libraries?
To disappear. Technology is rarely the point. Sometimes it is. It's important to know how to use whatever it is and be able to use it effectively. But it's a means to an end. Most people, when they come to a public library to use the computer to, look for a job, they're not interested in using the computer. They're looking for a job. Or they're looking for healthcare information, or they're looking for education stuff, or they're, trying to keep up with the grandkids or whatever. And the technology is an enabling force. The technology is an important piece of that. You could say much the same about books. You could say much the same about mobile technologies. You could say the same about scholarly journal. On and on and on it goes. But really effective technologies like books have long since receded into people's minds, and you don't think of it that way. And you don't think of telephones or typewriters as technology. They're just tools and means to an end. And that, I think, is the best role of technology, is when it's no longer obvious, when it's no longer overt. I'm all for technology as the point. Don't get me wrong. I'm surrounded by it as we speak here. But more often than not, it works at its best when it's not the point.
I think you bring up an interesting point, though, because it's certainly true that a book is a piece of technology, and a really good one. One.
So good you don't think about it.
Exactly. But there's also a big affection for it, right? I mean, and so just a thought that occurred to me is that indeed, I think when technology disappears, that's when it can be at its most powerful, or whatever we're terming technology. But there's also, in some cases, there's kind of a love of the form that sometimes supersedes the love of the function.
Well, and in one of the courses I teach, we talk about the evolution of the book, and among other things, and turning your mind around the idea that the book is the content, not the form. It's about the story. And trust me, I am sitting in an office with I don't know how many books, and I got books stacked up by my bedside at home, as my father would have said, till hell won't hold anymore. So I'm completely about the codex. And I'm not a great e-reader kind of guy. I've tried it on my iPad. I don't have a Kindle. I like reading books. I like reading physical books. They work really well for me. Other people much prefer them in some sort of, digitally mediated way. That's perfectly fine. But the digitally mediated way is going to generate innovation because the technology is overt and people are now thinking about it. So, the physical book, the codex, continues to evolve and new features are being added to it as time goes on. But, people growing up today who are used to reading on Kindles and tablets and phones and other kinds of devices are not going to be encumbered by what the rest of us have thought about in terms of print for all these generations. And so they're going to tell stories differently, and ultimately they're going to tell different stories. And that's all part of the deal, too. There are things you can do in a codex that you couldn't do in a scroll, and there's things you can do in a scroll that you couldn't do in a clay tablet, and there's things you can do with mechanically printed that you can't do with handwriting. And so this is an old story that we haven't thought about really hard because the form didn't change for a long time. So they're going to be different. What's going to happen to the novel? What's going to happen to the poem? What's going to happen to the short story? In the short run and then in the long run, when people think about adding all kinds of new features and new functions and new genres and all kinds of things, wow. And you could say the same thing about music, you could say the same thing about film, you could say the same thing about lots of different cultural objects, that they're just going to be really different, which is a tremendous opportunity for us. I mean, and the cost of access is so much lower. You don't need a publisher, you don't need a record company. So all these voices and all these stories are going to come out that would never have emerged before. That's a tremendous thing for the human enterprise. It's a tremendous challenge, and particularly for a field like ours that's trying to keep a handle on all this stuff, but make sense out of it and help people to find it and use it and so on. But yay, that means we're even more valuable.
Sometimes technology is visible, but not necessarily in a positive sense. As a technologist, trying to explain the network sometimes to non-technologists who are in positions of purchasing things, to explain why we need our infrastructure current can be difficult. Well,
and it's worth saying also that it can also be a barrier. I mean, there's barriers of access and cost and facility and interest and all of these other things. And this is by no means a paradise or a panacea, and we're all going to have implants someday, and we're all going to, whatever, which may well be the case. But again, now here's the role of libraries as an equalizer that allows for equity of access, not only of information resources, but also of the means by which we get those information resources. And that gets even more valuable in a more fragmented information environment.
You've begun answering this question, but I'm wondering if you could continue naming or listing or calling out some of the most compelling technological issues facing libraries today.
Would that we knew. I have a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that the most important technological issue facing us we don't know about yet. Because that's been the case, right? And those of us who've been around for a while, I remember online card catalog systems that had the image of the old card on a green screen with a dot at the bottom of the middle where the hole would have been for the rod to go through. And that was a big deal in 1978.
Sure, right.
Right. And ever since then, it's been one generation after another, CD-ROMs and jukeboxes, and then local area networking, and then wide area networking, and then the internet, and on we go. And we've been, playing catch-up for 30 years, give or take, without the budget, without the training, without the staff, and it's been a heroic effort to try to keep up with all that stuff, generation after generation, year after year, decade after decade, to try to manage all of this. And, every once in a while, innovate along the way, like, hey, we could build something. Hey, we built OCLC. We built the MARC record. We were one of the first professions to use technology, computer technology in a meaningful, large-scale way. So we're builders, we're innovators, we're designers. That's all part of the portfolio. The mobile thing is really important. I don't think anybody's fully got a grasp on that yet. I just literally 15 minutes ago came from a session of a research presentation here of a couple days worth of a think tank about young people and how young people view technology. And the most interesting thing that is still ringing in my head is that there's a panel of teenagers who already see a gap in technological use between themselves and their younger siblings.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
That their elementary school brothers and sisters are using and thinking about technology different. Those kids these days, they don't get it. And these are like ninth graders.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Saying this about their sixth grade siblings that, oh my God, they use technology in a whole different way. I don't quite know how to feel about that, whether to be encouraged, or terrified, or both. Or just, it's more of the same. It's just going faster. And so there's, you can tick them off, the Lita top trends, and the next one will be in tomorrow's, GeekWire, and on it will go. And we just soldier on and manage it the best we can and innovate along the way and do the best we can for our communities.
As you've noted, technology does move quickly, and many libraries do have trouble keeping up, let alone a large organization such as ALA. And ALA uses tech for a lot of things, for its operations. It also influences and acts as a resource for libraries across the country in terms of technology practices and technology policy. What's your assessment of ALA's technological agility?
Well, I'm glad you called out the two pieces of it. Let me talk about them in different ways. The policy piece, I think ALA has done fantastic work about that. When you think about the things that OITP has done, the Office of Information Technology Policy,
yes,
and other folks in the Washington office around E-rate stuff, around copyright, around net neutrality, around that whole Adobe thing that happened a few weeks ago that completely erupted. And we brought in Adobe, not exactly to its knees, but we got their attention and we made them say they were sorry. Okay, that was the librarians. Let's just give ourselves a little credit for that. I think in terms of policy stuff, I think ALA has done terrific work. And as I understand it, they are respected and valued in Washington and other kind of places. And that's a role that has been nurtured for many years with great leadership in the Washington office. And I think that's terrific.
I agree with that assessment.
ALA is a technological institution, mediocre at best. So my, I have to tell the story. My husband, God love him, who's an attorney, who is not a librarian, joined ALA, primarily so he could vote for me, but also to see what's going on. And
families do that for each other.
Well, right. If he was running for the president of the American Bar Association, they wouldn't let me join, so I'm off the hook. He said it took forever to just join. So what he had to go through and all the clicking and the this and the that and we ask for a lot of information and we want to know stuff and that, but it's the shoemaker's children, which is so often the case. You're paying attention to everybody else's stuff and the ALA website is what it is. It works more often than not. I think we all wish it would be better, but I think we all understand why it is how it is. So on the policy end, I think ALA has done a fantastic job. As them as a technological institution, B-.
Many libraries are undergoing a shift in mindset from transactional to transformational. What does that mean to you, and how can such a change be best facilitated?
This is a fascinating thing, and you hear it referred to in different ways, and boy, I love this idea that it ain't just about circling books or DVDs or CDs. I mean, it is, and how many hits on your website, and how many uses of your databases, and how many reference questions you get, and how many people turn up at Story Hour, and how many tax forms you pass out. And we count those things because they're easy to count. And they look good in an annual report, and you can go tell the provost or the city council or the principal about this stuff, so that's all great. But it ain't the deal, and it never has been. It was just an easy thing to count, because the deal is what we do and how we do it and how we affect people and the effect that we have on people and how that helps them to move forward in their lives. Great librarians have always known that it's the change you can make in people's lives, that it's the door you can open, it's the eyes you can open, it's the 11-year-old me who borrowed Slaughterhouse-Five, which, for the record, was a terrible idea. I remember reading Slaughterhouse-Five in my dentist's office, as a kid, and I don't know what I made of it. No doubt it, scarred me for life, but there it was, and I read it. Whatever I made out of it, and You know, those kind of transformations happen every minute in libraries of all kinds all over the world. And I think people get that more than we do. Because if you ask people about libraries, yes, they'll talk about books and they'll talk about librarians and this, that, and the other thing. And then they'll say, oh, but it's the place where I found this author that I love, or it's the place where I found this job, or it's the place that I found myself. And so I think we undersell ourselves a little bit, and I think we don't acknowledge and I don't want to say embrace, but I don't think we acknowledge that as much as we could. I think that is starting to change, and in particular as we've kind of exhausted all the methods to show people how many things we circ and how wonderful we are, and that just isn't working anymore as much. Now I think, you know, it's the role of the anecdote. It's way harder to measure. It's way harder to quantify. It's way harder to, you know, put that on a chart. But you know, the role we have in economic development and community building, the role we have in, you know, in embedding in research projects and curricula in schools and universities and so on. It's those kind of places where librarianship sort of seeps in and fills in the gaps and shores up these kinds of activities, and, you know, it makes them be even better than they are. That, I think everybody kind of gets that, but it's a lot harder to put in an annual report, and so not everybody has kind of gotten to that point. I think we're making progress.
What is the one thing you wish to change in libraries during your term, and how will you change it?
How to say this? I have measured expectations for what anybody can do in a year as ALA president, particularly the prospect that it would be me doing it. There are lots of great examples of people who've, you know, done terrific things. The Spectrum Scholarships, I think, is one of those great achievements that we all point to as a presidential initiative, and the emerging leaders and so on. I have much more measured expectations for myself, and particularly the fact that I'm going to be able to affect change in libraries. I think that's hubris at best. I want libraries and librarians to ask hard questions. And that's hard to do on a day-to-day basis when you're trying to keep the doors open and run the story hour and you know, staff the desk and keep the vendors at bay and all the rest of it. But I want to help people to ask themselves and their institutions and their colleagues the really hard questions about what is to come and how we move forward to a future that strengthens the idea of the library, that strengthens the institution of the library, that strengthens the profession of librarianship, about which I am very protective, and that helps us to do what we do better. And that's hard, because it means making hard choices. It means looking very far in the future. It means perhaps giving stuff up. It means some tough moments in a resource-constrained environment to a population who doesn't always get it, or doesn't always appreciate it. And but to lead, lead by example, shine a light on great things that are going on, ask some pointed questions, which is what I've tried to do throughout my entire career as an educator and a writer and such. Is, so what are we doing, and how do we do it better, and what does it mean, and why are we doing it, and where does it come from, and what's the right mix of innovation and tradition? And those are the kind of things that I would like to be a little bit more in people's minds if I get to shoot my mouth off for a year as president of ALA.
What is the one thing that must not change, and why?
Oh, there's got to be a puppet closet, doesn't there? I mean, that was in some talk I gave. There's got to be a puppet closet. And my other answer would be story hour. And I mean that a little bit. I'm actually dead serious about that. When I, all those years ago when my students put together the Internet Public Library back in Michigan, the only thing I insisted they have was a story hour, because that's what a public library is. That public libraries have story hours. And the rest of what they did, the design and the collections and the reference service and all the rest of it, was fantastic stuff. And I continue to be in awe of all the things that those students did in the course of 10 weeks for 2 credits, as I promised them I would always say. And they had to have a story hour. And they didn't have this is 1995. They didn't have the first idea what that meant. And they went off and did it. And they baked, it was one of the first streaming audio over, wasn't PowerPoint, but audio over images on the internet. They baked these dough figures that were like puppets and painted them and recreated an old English folktale called Molly Whoopie. And they recorded the soundtrack over it, the narration over it, and it went from slide to slide to slide. This was 1995. Who had a streaming audio server in 1995? Nobody did. And so that kind of connection to what always has been and to what people think of as library and what we think of as library. I think those kind of critical things about service to young people, about entertainment and diversion and solace and reading and all of that. These pieces that are just rock solid, fundamental to us. Reinterpreted, yes, but there's got to be a puppet closet. And we also know that story hour makes a huge difference. Kids come to story hour. People, oh well, it's it's a place for parents to drop their kids for an hour. Will they go off and do something and whatever? Sure. And we know that it has an enormous effect on vocabulary when kids get to school.
That's correct. It's a gateway experience. Yeah.
Right. So it ain't just nice. It is nice, but it ain't just nice. It's critical, and that's us.
What makes you the best choice for ALA president?
Well, okay, so the campaigner in me says, I'd be great at this. And I think I would. When I look at what I think presidents of any association like this, and in particular ALA, can do, I think there's two pieces of this. One of which is representing the profession and the institution to the wider world. I have a lot of experience speaking and talking and writing. I give a great interview. And so I think that maps well onto that focus. And the other is this, to the internal world, is to help to lead people through thinking about these difficult and energizing opportunities. And that's what I've done as an educator. That's what I've done as a writer, is try to poke with pointed questions and then suggest some ideas and ways to think our way to the next level, because that's how we get to the next level, is creativity, innovation, risk-taking, a little bit of failure here and there in a productive way, and that gets us to being better.
Imagine that you have been elected and you're nearing the end of your term. How will you know that you've been successful?
I will know I've been successful if I am still standing on my own 2 feet at the end of my term, courage intact. And if there's a spontaneous groundswell of support for a second term, that's how I will know. Absent that, which I think is pretty ambitious, but I'd like to have all those things happen. Absent that, I think having some sense that this kind of discussion has been undertaken, that people are seeing the world in different ways, that I've been able to motivate people to think a little bit more about what comes next, to be able to share our message with the wider world. If I could, what I so want to do is I want to be on The Daily Show. I want to be on Ellen. I want to be on the Today Show. I want to get on Colbert. I don't care what it is. And get over this notion that we're nice. Libraries, oh, they're so nice. Oh, isn't that nice that you work in a library? Yeah, we're nice, and we are absolutely critical infrastructure. And if I can get that message out, and if I can get our colleagues to, move a step or two in their own thinking about the way forward, I will leave the presidency a happy man.
This has been a great chat. Thank you so much for your time today.
This has been great fun. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Folks, be sure to stay tuned, or actually you don't do that on the interwebs, but be sure to take a look around at the other interviews that we have with the other candidates for ALA president, and see you next time. Thanks so much.